It was the year 1834 in Madrid. The king was dead, but his story wasn't over. Late that night, a royal physician was called to the palace. Not to save the king's life. That chance was long gone. He was brought there for something stranger. Something that made even the most experienced hands hesitate. He wasn't asked to treat a patient. He was told to prepare a dead body. Carefully, quietly. Because the secrets hidden beneath that silk-covered corpse weren't just about a man. They were about a legacy. A dynasty built on lies, fear, and corruption. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel peaceful. The air was heavy, not just with the smell of death, but with something worse. A sense that power had rotted from the inside, that this wasn't just the end of a king, it was the end of everything he'd poisoned. And as the physician lifted the sheet, he saw more than flesh. He saw the truth of a reign that destroyed a country, one secret at a time. Ferdinand was born in a palace, but not into greatness. From the very beginning he carried something dark in his blood. Not a curse from heaven, but a curse from his own family tree. His parents were cousins. Their parents had been cousins too. This wasn't rare in royal families, but in Spain it had gone too far. For generations they had married within the same circle, hoping to protect the crown, not realizing they were poisoning it from within. By the time Ferdinand came into the world, the damage was done. He looked like any other baby, but there were things you couldn't see. Not in his face, not yet. They were buried deep, in his body, his mind, his future. Even as a child he was strange. Not loud, not wild, but tense. Always watching, always waiting for something to go wrong. He didn't smile much, he didn't trust easily. The palace was full of servants, tutors, guards, but he had no friends, and the ones who got close didn't stay long. The court whispered, not openly, never loudly, but everyone had heard the stories. The boy wasn't right. His body grew in odd ways, his behaviour was worse. Teachers said he was bright but cold, distant. His moods would turn in a moment, kind one day, cruel the next. He wasn't raised by love, he was raised by performance. Every gesture was watched, every mistake reported. His father, King Charles IV, was weak. He preferred hunting to ruling. His mother, Maria Louisa, held the real power, and even that was borrowed from her lover, a man named Godoy. The Queen's affair was an open secret. The boy saw it all, and he learned something early. Trust means nothing in a palace. So he built his world out of silence and control. He became obsessed with how people looked at him. Every glance felt like a test. Every smile felt fake. He learned to hate laughter, because he always thought it was about him, and sometimes it was. Servants giggled when they thought he couldn't hear. Courtiers made jokes with their eyes. Foreign guests whispered rumours in their letters home. He was a prince, but he felt like a joke in a costume. As he grew older, he tried to fight back, not with kindness, not with understanding, but with power. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be wanted. Some in the palace began calling him El Deseado, the desired one. They meant it as flattery, but for Ferdinand it became an obsession. If they wouldn't love him, they would fear him. The more they laughed behind his back, the more serious he became. He mimicked strength. He practiced charm. But inside, he was cracking. By his teenage years, his tutors reported strange behaviour. Long periods of silence followed by angry outbursts. He would fire servants for the smallest mistake. Once, when a young page walked in on him changing clothes, Ferdinand had the boy beaten and sent away. Not because of what the boy did, but because of what he saw. Ferdinand couldn't stand being seen. He began keeping lists, people who disrespected him, people who needed to be punished later. His mind became a map of old insults and quiet revenge, and still, no one truly feared him, because he wasn't king, not yet. But what happens when a broken child is finally handed the crown? Ferdinand didn't wait for the crown to start acting like a king. By the time he was in his 20s, Spain was already falling apart. The empire that once ruled oceans now barely ruled itself. The streets of Madrid were restless. In the colonies, rebellion was brewing, and inside the palace things were worse. His father, King Charles IV, had become a shadow. He still wore the crown, but he didn't carry the weight. That belonged to Manuel Godoy, the Queen's favourite, her lover, her puppet master, her real king. Everyone knew it, especially Ferdinand. He watched his father be humiliated year after year, pretending not to notice the way Godoy spoke for him, signed in his name, ruled through his weakness. Ferdinand hated them both, but more than that, he hated being powerless. He wanted the throne, not because he believed he could save Spain, but because he believed no one else should have it. He began to gather men around him, generals, nobles, bishops, anyone tired of Godoy's grip. They met in secret, passed messages through folded fans and coded letters. They called themselves the Fernandinos, loyal to the prince, or so they thought. Ferdinand made promises. He told each of them what they wanted to hear, that Spain would be restored, that tradition would return, that honour would matter again. He said the right words, but he didn't mean them. He wasn't planning to fix Spain. He was planning to take it, whatever the cost. And the more he planned, the more paranoid he became. He didn't trust his allies. He didn't trust his own family. He didn't trust anyone. In every smile he saw a threat. In every nod he heard a lie. He believed betrayal was coming, so he struck first. In 1807, he made a deal behind closed doors, a quiet offer to the most dangerous man in Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. Ferdinand would betray his own father. He would hand over the crown in exchange for support, in exchange for power. But Napoleon saw something else in him, weakness. When the plot was discovered, Ferdinand panicked. He didn't stand by the men who had risked everything to help him. He named them, one by one. He confessed to every detail. He begged his father for mercy. The same men who had called him the desired one were now in chains. It wasn't ambition, it was cowardice. And it worked. His father forgave him. Godoy smiled politely. The court acted as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Ferdinand had shown the world exactly who he was. Not a saviour, not a leader, just another man willing to destroy anyone to feel important. He didn't need armies to ruin Spain. He didn't need to sit on the throne. All he needed was a wife. Her name was Maria Antonia. She was just 16 when they sent her to Madrid. A princess from Naples. Bright eyes, soft voice, full of dreams they never warned her about. Her letters before the wedding still survive. She wrote of hope, of love, of wanting to be a good wife, a good queen. She believed in fairy tales. No one told her the truth. Ferdinand chose her because she was royal and obedient. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a vessel. The wedding was grand, gold bells, music, the kind of ceremony that makes people forget how broken a country really is. Crowds cheered, portraits were painted. Madrid smiled for a day, but weddings end, and wedding nights begin. The moment the door closed, everything changed. She didn't know what was coming. She had been raised in silence, like most royal girls, taught to sing, to smile, to kneel, but no one prepared her for him. That night, his valet approached her ladies-in-waiting with a strange request. Cushions, oils, a certain bed frame specially crafted. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. When Ferdinand undressed, she screamed, loud enough that the guards outside looked at each other, unsure if they should enter. She cried for God. She begged to leave, but she was told to stay, told it was her duty. The next day she did not speak. The days after she changed. From the outside nothing was wrong. They went to church, they dined with nobles. She smiled when expected, but behind closed doors it was a different world. Ferdinand treated her like an object, not with violence, not as at first, but with something colder. He monitored her like a doctor studies a patient. If she flinched, he took notes. If she bled, he blamed her. His physicians returned again and again, making adjustments. New cushions, new techniques, new tools. Every night was an experiment. Every morning a recovery. She started taking laudanum to sleep, then to forget, then just to survive. He believed her body was the problem. She believed she was cursed. And yet, he kept trying. Not for love, not even for lust. For an heir. They tried and failed again and again. When she finally became pregnant, the palace whispered with hope. But in the 4th month she miscarried, and then again a year later. The second time she nearly died. After that she stopped trying to be seen. She moved through the palace like a shadow. Thin, quiet, eyes always somewhere else. Her letters became shorter. Then they stopped altogether. In 1807 she died. Officially it was illness. But everyone knew she didn't die of sickness, she died of sorrow, of exhaustion, of being married to a man who treated her body like a tool and her pain like a mistake. At the funeral, Ferdinand wept, but not for her. He wept for the failure, the wasted years, the missing heir. And while her body was lowered into the ground, he was already asking for names, potential wives, stronger ones that wouldn't break so easily. After Maria Antonia's death, the palace went quiet. Not out of grief, but out of tension. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what came next. Ferdinand didn't mourn, not in the way most men would. He locked himself away for a few weeks, yes, but it wasn't sadness that kept him there. It was frustration, obsession, plans. He didn't speak of his wife, he spoke of failure, he didn't say her name, and he said the word heir. To Ferdinand, her death was just another setback, and now he believed more than ever that the problem wasn't him, it was nature, and nature could be fixed, with science, with power, with the right people in the right places. He began surrounding himself with doctors, yes, but not just doctors, strange ones, foreign ones, alchemists, healers from distant lands, men who promised results, for a price. They came with bottles, powders, maps of the stars. They told him stories of ancient rituals and forgotten cures, and Ferdinand believed them. He swallowed potions made from crushed pearls and ground bone. He wore amulets under his robes. His chambers were filled with strange smells, herbs burning, oils boiling, pages of old scripts pinned to the walls like warnings. When science didn't give him answers, he turned to craftsmen. He had his own personal workshop built beneath the palace, hidden, guarded, a place where artisans were told to make the impossible real. They carved tools, constructed strange frames, designed cushions, straps and devices no one dared to speak of. It became a factory for silence, every item made to serve the same goal, to help the king create life without causing death. No one questioned him. They couldn't. If you refused, you vanished. If you spoke out, you were reassigned, far away, to places where your letters never reached home. Even the palace spies worked for him now, not to watch his enemies, but to watch his staff. He trusted no one. Every physician, every maid, and every carpenter, all were watched, all were warned. And still it wasn't enough, because no device, no drug, no ancient method could do what Ferdinand needed most. He didn't just want a child. He wanted control over nature, over women, over the very idea of failure. He wanted to reshape the world, beginning with the human body. And so the palace transformed. It was no longer just a seat of power. It became something else, a lab, a trap, a place where fear and silence kept the wheels turning. When they announced his second marriage, the people clapped politely. But inside the palace, everyone froze. Maria Isabel of Portugal, 19 years old, beautiful, proper, trained, but not ready. She arrived with flowers in her hair and faith in her heart. She didn't know she'd just stepped into a palace that no longer belonged to the living. She wouldn't leave alive. Maria Isabel tried to smile. From the moment she arrived, she did what she was taught to do. She bowed. She kissed hands. She repeated polite phrases in stiff Castilian. She walked with grace even when her shoes hurt. She smiled even when no one smiled back. She was the second queen, and she knew what had happened to the first. But she thought if she followed every rule, if she was quiet, obedient, careful, maybe she would survive. She was wrong. It began the same way. Late nights, locked doors, royal physicians waiting outside her chamber, piping, servants passing notes in silence. The queen's body became the centre of everything. Examined, measured, monitored. Her diet was controlled, her movements tracked, her sleep recorded. She wasn't treated like a woman, she was treated like a machine that had to produce something. And if it didn't, it had to be fixed. Ferdinand's obsession was no longer quiet. It roared through the palace like smoke. He demanded results, not just from his queen, but from everyone. He ordered his doctors to find new solutions. When they failed, he brought in foreign ones. Men from Vienna, from Naples, even from the distant Ottoman courts. They brought with them strange tools and strange ideas, and the queen had no say. There are records, whispered accounts from chambermaids, midwives, a few guards who never returned. They spoke of bleeding, binding, cold metal pressed against soft flesh, of screams that echoed through stone walls deep into the night. One maid said she heard the Queen begging in broken Spanish again and again, "Please, stop, please, enough." But there was never enough. The king believed her failures were hers alone. He didn't see her pain. He saw resistance, and resistance to him was betrayal. So the palace changed again. Rooms were repurposed. A chapel became a recovery ward. A sitting room, a surgical prep space. Curtains were drawn all day. Guards stationed at odd hours. Nobles were told to stay away from certain corridors, and when they asked why, they were told to mind their prayers. The people outside began to notice too. There were fewer appearances, no royal walks, no festivals, and when the Queen did show her face, she was pale, thin, wrapped in heavy fabric, even in summer. Some said she looked haunted. Others said she looked like a ghost already. Then came the phantom pregnancies. Twice the court announced she was with child. Twice they celebrated. Bells rang, gifts were sent, and twice nothing came. The second time the doctors insisted it had been a loss, a quiet tragedy. But behind closed doors, servants whispered that no child had ever existed, that it had all been a performance, one she had no choice in. On Christmas Eve 1818, Maria Isabel collapsed in her chamber. They said it was from exhaustion. They said it was a sudden fever. They said all the right things, but those who dressed the body said different. They said there were marks, bruises, swelling, signs no priest could bless away. The next morning she was buried in royal silk, pale blue, soft, perfect, the same colour Ferdinand had ordered for her wedding night. He wept again, but not for her. He wept because the crown still had no heir. And in the silence that followed, another mask was added to the royal collection. Another face no one would speak of again. While Ferdinand measured herbs and whispered to doctors about bloodlines, Spain was slipping away. Across the sea in the colonies, people were rising. In Mexico, in Argentina, in Venezuela. Places that had once sent gold and sugar and pride back to Madrid were now sending messages of rebellion. Leaders with fire in their voices, movements born from hunger and rage. They wanted freedom, and they were done asking. Spain's empire, once so vast it swallowed the sun, was crumbling. But in the palace, Ferdinand wasn't watching the world. He was watching his wife's pulse. He was listening to healers chant over bathwater. He was focused on whether her hands were warm or cold at dusk. He believed if he could fix the bedroom, he could fix the throne. His court tried to bring him reports and letters, warnings, desperate pleas from governors. He ignored most of them. When he did respond, the answers were late, vague, or filled with superstition. "Send holy men," he wrote to one council. "Fast for 7 days," he told another. He believed prayers could hold an empire together. He believed pain, if holy enough, could produce miracles. And while he knelt, Spain burned. Cities fell, flags changed, colonies declared themselves nations. And back in Madrid, something else was breaking. His paranoia. It had always been there, hiding under his silk robes and royal masks, but now it was everywhere. He saw betrayal in his advisor's hands, in his priest's eyes, even in the footsteps of his guards. He stopped trusting anyone. Ministers were fired without cause, judges removed, bishops reassigned. Anyone who questioned him vanished from the palace. Some were exiled, some imprisoned, some were never seen again. He believed secret messages were being passed in folded laundry. He believed candles flickering meant someone was plotting against him. He believed his own shadow was too long, and made his tailors change his robe pattern. His madness didn't just live in his mind, it began to stain the city. Madrid's councils became hushed rooms full of fear. Cathedrals closed early, trials happened without witnesses, and the people, the ones still loyal, still silent, began to avoid the palace walls. It was no longer a place of power, it was a warning. And then, as if summoned by fever, he married again. Queen Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, a girl with soft features, barely 20, raised in faith, raised to serve. The wedding was rushed, the church decorated in white lilies, but there was no joy, only tension. She did as she was told, she knelt, she prayed, she tried not to cry, and once again the pattern began. Ferdinand demanded silence, obedience, purity. He forbade her from being touched by other women. Only his chosen physicians were allowed near her. He dictated her food, her movements, even the words she could say in public. She became pale, then thin, then quiet, and one day she collapsed. The king was told she was pregnant. For a brief moment the palace dared to hope, but the midwife knew something was wrong. So did the priest who came to bless her room. So did the guard who overheard a whisper behind the chapel. It wasn't the king's child, and Ferdinand was the last one to know. She was born just before dawn. The bells rang across Madrid. Announcements were sent. The people gathered in the square. A child had come, a royal daughter, a blessing, they said, a future queen, they whispered. Her name would be Isabella. And though no one dared say it aloud, many believed the same thing. She was not his, not really. Ferdinand smiled for the crowds. He held the infant in trembling arms, kissed her forehead with shaking lips, but those closest to him could see it. Something in his eyes had changed. It wasn't joy, it was need. He clung to her like a drowning man holds driftwood. He told his council she was the light of his life, the future of Spain, the answer to everything. He ordered portraits to be painted before she could even lift her head. He had medallions struck showing her profile against his own. Father and daughter side by side, a lie etched in silver, and the Queen, St. Maria Christina, watched silently. She had done what no other had. She had given him a child, and she had done it without breaking. But she paid a price. From the moment Isabella was born, Maria Christina was no longer treated as a wife. She was watched like a prisoner. Every step she took was shadowed. Every room she entered was recorded. Her letters were read, her meals tasted, her breath counted. Her ladies-in-waiting were replaced one by one. Only those loyal to the king remained. He spoke to her less and less, and observed her more and more. He believed she was hiding something. Maybe not another affair, but something. A secret, a plan, a thought she hadn't shared. He began watching her hands when she folded laundry. He questioned how long she lingered near windows. He demanded to know why she changed the baby's blanket twice in 1 hour. The palace became quieter than ever, but not calmer. The air felt sharp, like glass. Maria Christina lived as if in a hall of mirrors. Every glance returned, every motion reflected, distorted, used against her. And Ferdinand's obsession grew stranger. He didn't trust the air in her chambers. He ordered the tapestries removed, claiming they trapped toxins. He had the fireplace sealed, said smoke from the chimney might carry betrayal. Then he began inspecting her skin. At first it was just her hands. He'd take them gently, look closely, say nothing. Then her arms, her neck, her feet. He'd call in doctors without warning. Ask them to examine a freckle, a vein, a bruise. He said he was searching for poison, not in her drink, in her blood, in her flesh, on her breath. He believed someone had gotten to her, that she was being used, controlled, touched by unseen hands. He watched her sleep. More than once she woke to find him standing at the foot of her bed, eyes wide, mouth silent, hands trembling. And each time he asked the same question, "Is she really mine?" But he never waited for an answer, because deep down Ferdinand knew the truth, and he knew it didn't matter anymore. The child may not have been his, but she was all he had left. By the time Isabella could walk, the palace could barely breathe. It wasn't a home anymore. It wasn't even a court. It was a maze, a trap built from fear. Ferdinand trusted no one, not his ministers, not his priests, not even the guards who stood outside his own door. He began testing people, not with orders, with lies. He would tell one minister a false rumour, that the French were planning to invade, that Maria Christina was writing to foreign powers, that gold had gone missing from the treasury. Then he'd wait, 2 days, 3, and if that same rumour came back to him from someone else, the minister was gone. No trial, no explanation, just gone. Servants disappeared too. A maid who folded the wrong sheet, a cook who sneezed during prayer, a guard who asked a question twice. At first the palace tried to cover it, said they were transferred, promoted. But the truth was obvious. Their beds were stripped by the midnight, their names erased by dawn. And the silence. The silence grew louder than any scream. People walked slower, spoke softer, smiled less. You could hear a fork drop across an entire corridor. Laughter no longer echoed. Children were kept away, guests stopped visiting. Even Isabella's nursery became a fortress of whispers. Maria Christina nursed her daughter with one hand and held fear in the other. She knew anyone could be watching, listening, reporting. The walls, it seemed, had ears, and eyes, and orders. Ferdinand had installed secret compartments in the ceilings. He had small holes drilled into walls for listening. He placed trusted men, not soldiers, not officials, but strangers, hidden in plain clothes, stationed near stairwells, cloisters, balconies. If someone spoke too freely, they were asked to explain. If they stammered, they were escorted away. Even food was suspect. Every item on the royal table was tested twice. Meals arrived cold not because the kitchen was slow, but because the fear of poison was faster. One night a servant dropped a silver spoon. It rolled under the table. Ferdinand leapt up, wild-eyed, demanding to know what else had been dropped. When the boy bent to reach it, 2 guards seized him. He never came back. That night the king didn't eat. But the worst was yet to come, because the person Ferdinand stopped trusting next was himself. He began waking up confused. Words would vanish from his mouth mid-sentence. He would accuse someone of treason, then forget who he was talking to. He'd ask for documents he had already signed. He would pray in Latin, then forget the name of the saints. At first they called it exhaustion, then divine punishment. But Ferdinand believed something else. He believed they were getting inside his head, that someone, maybe even his own wife, had found a way to enter his thoughts, to change them, to erase them. He ordered new candles made only from beeswax, said the old ones were tainted. He had all the mirrors removed from his room, said they reflected false images. He made priests sleep outside his door, said their prayers kept them away. He whispered at night, to himself, to Isabella, to shadows. He still wore the crown, but it no longer sat on a man. It sat on a mind unravelling in real time and thread by golden thread. By now, Ferdinand barely resembled a king. His robe still shimmered, his crown still gleamed, but inside everything was fading. His body shrunk, his skin turned thin, nearly translucent. His hands trembled even when they held nothing. His eyes seemed to look not at people but through them. He barely walked, he barely ate, but he still gave orders. They no longer made sense. Pages of scribbles, crossed-out words, letters to men who had died years before. He spoke to statues. He mumbled in prayer, then forgot who he was praying to. He accused his daughter's dolls of treason. The palace doctors gave him laudanum, then opium, then nothing at all. Nothing worked. He was dying. But Ferdinand feared something more than death. He feared being forgotten. He ordered new portraits, even as his features melted with illness. He had decrees issued in his name long after he could no longer sign. He made Maria Christina promise, again and again, that Isabella would be queen. Promise, he whispered, night after night, breath rattling. Not because he believed in her, because he believed she was all that stood between his name and oblivion. The church stood by his bedside in full robes, bishops, priests, incense, bells, all of it. But Ferdinand didn't look at them. He kept staring at the ceiling, at something no one else could see. In those last days, the silence in the palace was complete. Even the walls seemed to hold back sound. And then one morning, he stopped breathing, just like that. No last words, no final blessing, just stillness. Maria Christina wept beside him. Not loudly, not for long. She still had a daughter to protect. The royal physician arrived before sunrise. He came quietly with gloves, towels, and 2 assistants. His job was not to save the king, it was to prepare him, to make him look whole, to make sure whatever damage had been done, to the body, to the mind, had stayed hidden beneath the surface. He moved slowly, carefully, but when he peeled back the final sheet, he stopped. There, on the king's chest, something no one had seen before, a mark, faint but unmistakable. Not from age, not from illness, something else. The physician leaned closer, and what he saw wasn't just a wound, it was a secret, one that would never be written in the royal records, one that even death could not erase. He turned to his assistants, and without a word, he began to sew the sheets closed, not to cover the king, but to bury the truth with him. They said the body was to be treated with care. The official orders were clear, no full autopsy, just a cleansing before burial. Gentle hands, silent mouths, but the physician knew better, knew what the crown truly feared, and not sin, but discovery. Still the work began. The body was pale, soft, already sinking into itself. But there was more. Beneath the skin, something was wrong. The chest cavity showed signs of collapse. His lungs were shrunken, as if he had been choking slowly for years. His stomach showed scarring, long, uneven, deep. Not from illness, from blades guided by strange hands. And then there were the bones. They were too light, too brittle. Some were fused in ways that didn't make sense. His hips bore signs of injury. His spine was curved, twisted near the base. One assistant whispered, "This wasn't age. This wasn't natural." The physician said nothing. In his journal, later hidden in the church archives, he would write, "This was a man rebuilt over and over, and broken each time." There were signs of procedures no doctor would dare speak of. Crude incisions near the groin, as if something had been inserted or removed. Muscles that had atrophied on one side but not the other. Veins that had collapsed under the skin, overused or drained. And something else. Small, blackened spots on the inner lips, the gums, the tongue, as if he had been ingesting mercury, or worse, they didn't list it in the report. The church took the notes, sealed them, stored them beneath marble and wax and silence. The burial was held 2 days later. A closed coffin, gold-laced, velvet-lined, carried by 12 guards in ceremonial armour. Incense filled the air. Bells tolled low and slow. The people wept, or pretended to. Ministers recited speeches. Priests called him chosen, loyal, beloved. They called him El Deseado, the desired one. But outside the cathedral no one said his name, because Spain had changed. It wasn't the empire it once was. It wasn't whole. It wasn't proud, and it was tired, broken, confused, and while Ferdinand's body lay sealed beneath stone, the country he left behind could not be sealed with it. Because a kingdom built on fear never really buries its king. It carries him, in silence, in shame, in what it becomes. When Isabella took the throne, she was still a child, too young to rule, too young to understand what she had inherited. She sat on a chair built by ghosts, surrounded by men who smiled too easily and prayed too loudly. Every decision she made was questioned, every step shadowed. The court was divided, the nobles restless, the people exhausted, the colonies were gone, the empire fractured. And across Europe, Spain became a whisper, a warning, a once great kingdom now ruled by uncertainty. Ferdinand was gone, but the damage he left behind wasn't. His legacy wasn't in monuments or victories or reforms. It wasn't in gold or glory or law. It was in wounds, in broken laws, in silenced rooms, in children who grew up knowing only fear. Some kings are remembered for what they built. Ferdinand is remembered for what he broke. And Spain for a long time lived in the shadow of one man's madness. Because sometimes history doesn't end when a ruler dies. Sometimes that's when the real story begins. If you genuinely liked this story, only then give it a like and subscribe for more powerful truths. What legacy would you leave if no one could lie about you? Tell us in the comments.